From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. We are approaching the finish line of the Alabama Legislature's 2025 regular session. The House and Senate met for the 28th and 29th legislative days this week. They'll reconvene on Wednesday for the 30th and final day before adjourning sine die. It has been a slog of a session in which lawmakers have found it difficult to get their bills to final passage. That began to change this week as the Senate on Tuesday ended its logjam and began passing legislation at a rapid pace. One high-profile bill receiving final passage this week was another 1-cent reduction to the state's sales tax on groceries. You may remember 2 years ago, the legislature passed a bill eliminating 1 cent off the state's 4-cent sales tax on food, with a process to cut the rest of the tax incrementally given sufficient revenue. That never happened. So this year, lawmakers passed House Bill 386 from State Representative Danny Garrett to lower the sales tax on food from 3% to 2%, effective September 1st. Senator Andrew Jones, who's backed the measure throughout, explained why lawmakers felt now was the right time to move forward with this tax relief.
You may remember we passed legislation 2 years ago to basically take down a penny at a time. We took off the 1st cent. The 2nd cent was going to come off when we hit a growth metric of 3.5%. We have not met that, but our budget chairman feel comfortable in going ahead and moving forward with taking that next cent off of the grocery tax. It's a big deal. It's a big tax cut. I think the fiscal note is $121.9 million.
Also on its way to the governor's desk is House Bill 166 from State Representative Lee Hulsey. Known as the Focus Act, the bill would ban the use of cell phones by students in school. Supporters, including Governor Kay Ivey, argue cell phones are a distraction to learning and contribute to discipline and emotional problems. During debate in the Senate, State Senator Chris Elliott again proposed an amendment to allow limited parent-student contact, but State Senator Donnie Chasteen, who is carrying the bill in the Senate, urged lawmakers to reject it. The amendment failed, and the bill passed with broad support.
I would urge members to think carefully about that amendment. You're going to hear from parents back home if this passes and they're not able to simply, they're not able to communicate with their child about practice being canceled, car breaking down, tire goes flat, forgot the soccer cleats.
The bill is tight as it is. There's devices that schools can use to put these phones away during instructional times. There's a front office that a child can use to call a parent. I think the biggest tether is going to come from parents not being able to contact their children. So in school systems where this has been implemented, it has worked.
Also receiving final passage this week is legislation known as the Speedy Trial Act. House Bill 307 from State Representative Jim Hill empowers the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court to appoint visiting judges from other circuits or retired judges to preside over specific violent crime cases upon request from the Attorney General or from a district attorney. Championed by Attorney General Steve Marshall, the bill marks a significant step forward towards addressing the state's backlog of violent crime cases. Marshall's chief counsel, Catherine Robertson, emphasized that the legislation was introduced in response to persistent concerns about continuances in violent crime cases, which have led to significant bottlenecks in certain judicial circuits, mounting frustration amongst victims.
We decided to bring it because of repeated complaints, specifically about continuances in violent crime cases. There are significant bottlenecks in certain circuits in our state where violent crime cases are not moving quickly and victims are getting frustrated. And so we had a global law enforcement meeting in Birmingham last summer where we discussed kind of all the challenges that people were facing, and backlog cases just kept coming up. So that was the impetus for this. How it will impact crime victims, look, it's not going to solve every case. It's not going to make every case move quickly. But the ones that have been sitting for a particularly long time that the DA or the AG really have on their radar as a priority, we hope that this will mean that those get moving quickly.
The House this week took up and passed Senate Bill 101 from State Senator Larry Stutz, which raises the age of medical consent from 14 to 18. This includes decisions on vaccines and mental health counseling. Minors would still be allowed to consent on things like birth control or STD treatments. The bill was carried in the House by State Representative Susan DuBose.
In the state of Alabama, I think most people would be shocked to learn that the age of medical consent is 14. It was the lowest in the nation. In fact, only 3 states are below the age of 18. That meant that children, 14-year-olds, could make all their own medical decisions, and parents could be kept from even seeing their medical records. So this raises that age up to 16. It gives parents the opportunity to participate in the health care of their minor children, as we all know they should. It just makes sense. This is going to protect children, and it's going to be important for parents in the state of Alabama. I have had emotional passion pleas from parents begging for legislation to raise the age of medical consent. There are nightmare stories out there where 14-year-olds are making all their own decisions, where they may have mental incapacities and all sorts of things going on. And parents are being kept from finding out medical diagnoses when they could step in and help their children.
That bill was amended in the House and will have to go back to the Senate for final passage. Lawmakers passed 2 bills aimed at cracking down on youth access to vaping and THC products. Supporters say the changes are long overdue as concerns over the health risks tied to these products continue to grow. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has that story.
Vape pens and THC products like Delta 8 could soon become much harder for Alabama teens to get. A bill passed by lawmakers would ban self-serve vape displays and vending machines in places minors can have access. It also restricts sales to specialty vape shops unless the product is FDA approved. Representative Barbara Drummond, who's pushed for this change over several sessions, says it's a matter of public health and protecting young people.
I'm gratified that we finally did something for the children of Alabama. I can't say that enough. That's what this has always has been about for me, is just safeguarding the welfare of and the health of those children.
The Senate made changes that increase penalties for retailers who violate the law, while easing penalties for minors caught with vape products. Senator David Sessions says the bill is about protecting families and ending a dangerous trend among young people.
But this is about our children. I have 5 huge reasons to pass this piece of legislation. My grandchildren.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's an honor to be able to drop this bill.
House Bill 445 takes aim at consumable THC products. It raises the purchase age to 21, imposes a 10% tax, caps THC at 10 milligrams per serving, and requires retailer licensing. The bill also limits where products can be sold, allowing them only in specialty shops or restricted areas of large grocery stores. Senator Tim Melson says the bill is a response to repeated abuse, including students overdosing at school.
About 3 or 4 weeks ago, our DA arrested 6 convenience store operators in one day, and they got several more that they're on a watch list. But it's a problem, and it's an unnecessary problem. As we all know, the hemp bill was never intended for consumption. It was all about economics, such as paper, rope, and clothing.
Lawmakers say enforcement will be key, especially as THC products continue to evolve. And for Drummond, the issue is personal.
And I got a call 3 years ago from the superintendent in Dallas County notifying me that a young man had died from vaping because his vape pipe was laced with fentanyl.
Goodness.
And his spirit has been with me ever since, because I couldn't let this go, because I just could not bear the thought of another young person losing their lives from vaping.
When signed into law, both bills would take effect later this year. Reporting from the State House in Montgomery, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Jeff. The House has spent much of its time this session waiting on a bogged-down Senate. This week, that began to change as a flurry of legislation started moving. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports on some of the notable action from the House.
The regular session is wrapping up, but the bills keep coming. The lower chamber hosts a debate on Senate Bill 5, which seeks to restructure the Alabama Department of Archives.
Use the board of directors to make it more in line with our other two flagship museums in the state, the Battleship and the Rocket Center.
This amendment would just take the Senate confirmations away from the portion of the bill.
I support, the speaker's the speaker being able to make an appointment without it going through confirmations. I don't think we have to rubber stamp that.
Senate Bill 5 is approved. The House agrees with changes to House Bill 386, addressing reducing the state tax on groceries.
Well, this is great. I think that we've reduced the grocery tax now 50%. We're still one of a few states that taxes groceries. We're headed, I think, toward zero tax on groceries, but we've certainly cut it 50%.
The House Democratic Caucus makes observations on action this session and look ahead to topics for next session.
They want to know what we are doing to combat the rising cost of living, increasing access to affordable health care, and ensuring that our communities are safe.
We're still paying grocery taxes in Alabama when a dozen eggs now cost $6. That's why, as we come to the end of this session, it's vital that we speak out against this and show the people of Alabama that there is a better way forward.
But what is bothersome is the extreme partisan process that has infected our committees and the intense focus on who gets the credit. Instead, our focus should always be on what's good for the people who sent us here to serve, not whose name happens to be on the top of the bill, especially when it was never their bill in the first place.
I introduced the Alabama Voting Rights Act this session, and why I will continue to fight for legislation to protect our most fundamental right as citizens, our sacred right to vote.
One criminal justice bill up for debate is Senate Bill 88, dealing with expungement.
SB 88 deals with the ability to expunge a prior criminal conviction. What this bill does is amends that to basically say that if no objection to the petition is filed, the court may set the matter for a hearing.
The process as we have it now.
Yes, ma'am.
What does that look like?
If there's no objection filed, it's a shall grant. Now it just says the court may grant.
Okay.
Senate Bill 88 passes. At the Alabama State House, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Randy. He mentioned that bill dealing with the State Archives and History Board and the amendment that was placed on it. That ended up being pretty consequential because instead of final passage, the bill had to go back upstairs to the Senate, where State Senator Roger Smitherman got another chance to filibuster the bill. He objected to the amendment, saying he did not want to relinquish the Senate's authority to confirm nominees to the board. The result was a 2-hour filibuster that made it difficult to move any legislation.
And they're gonna take Senate confirmation off. No, you can't take Senate confirmation off. Let's just be very frank about it. I've already said what I think this bill is going to do, and I just said how I'm totally against the bill. But I'm not. I won't stand in the way of your concurrence with the bill in terms of non-concurrence or whatever we got to do. But no, I'm not going to agree to that. I'm not going to agree to let whoever that might be wide and willy-nilly and just start throwing folks anywhere that they so see fit from the state and just without some oversight by us, at least as a body.
The Senate eventually voted to send the bill to a conference committee, so its fate will be decided when lawmakers return next week. Another bill just one step away from final passage is an immigration bill prioritized by Republicans this session. Senate Bill 53 from State Senator Wes Kitchens would establish the crime of human smuggling and provide penalties for harboring and transporting illegal immigrants. State Representative Ben Robbins carried it in the House, where it passed this week.
It codifies a practice that jail administrators are already doing now in terms of reporting illegal immigrant detainees and verifying their immigration status. And the second thing it does, it creates the crime of human smuggling, which is knowingly transporting an illegal immigrant for commercial purposes. I have a sub, sorry. That sub amends the amends exceptions, which allows for healthcare providers and any person operating for commercial and religious purposes. They are not guilty of committing the crime of human smuggling.
If I'm even using my own personal car, that would still be considered commercial? If I was transporting someone that was illegal?
If you know that person is illegal immigrant, then yes, it would be.
How would that person know? I mean, so you're saying it's a responsibility if you're helping someone that you check and say, before you get in my car, are you legal?
No, because you're helping that person. You're doing it for charitable or religious purposes or reason, not for a commercial motive.
That bill was amended in the House and now must go back to the Senate for final passage. Well, as bills pass the legislature, they head to the governor's desk. And this week, Governor Kay Ivey signed some notable legislation into law. Most notable were the General Fund and the Education Trust Fund budgets, as well as the RAISE Act. That's the bill that traveled alongside the education budget that modernizes the way the state will fund K-12 public schools. The governor said, quote, "These historic investments in core functions of government and our students' education are possible through our track record of conservative budgeting and strong leadership." The governor went on to add about the ETF, the budgets were made official this morning and will continue investing in proven programs like literacy and numeracy acts. It will support our Turnaround Schools initiative to target some of our lowest performing schools, end quote. Also signed into law is Lulu's Law. House Bill 198 from State Representative David Faulkner establishes a new shark alert system that warns beachgoers when a shark has bitten someone in the vicinity. It's named for Lulu Gribben, a Mountain Brook teenager who was attacked by a shark last year, losing a leg and part of her arm. There's Lulu right there with Governor Kay Ivey, her father on the end, Representative Faulkner, Senator Dan Roberts, Representative David Faulkner there, and House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter. Lulu has turned her traumatic experience into advocacy, urging lawmakers at the federal and state levels to take action. The state will set up an alert system similar to Amber Alerts that will buzz the phones of any beachgoers in the vicinity of a recent shark attack. Also now law is Senate Bill 119, which is a key plank in Governor Ivey's Safe Alabama crime prevention platform. It does a number of different things. First, it creates new prohibitions on the possession of a firearm. It will now be a Class C felony for someone to possess a firearm if they have been convicted of any felony offense within the past 5 years, or 3 felony offenses at one time. It will now be a Class C felony for someone to possess a firearm while out on bail awaiting trial for a violent offense. It also increases penalties for shooting into homes. It will now be a Class A felony for someone to shoot into an occupied dwelling. And it has stricter rules for parolees when it comes to firearms. It will be easier to sanction probationers and parolees found in possession of a firearm. And it includes an expansion of Aniah's Law. That's the constitutional amendment allowing judges to deny bail for those accused of violent crimes. That list of crimes would be expanded to include shooting into an occupied dwelling or solicitation, attempt, or conspiracy to commit murder. Juneteenth is now officially a state holiday. Governor Ivey signed into law House Bill 165 from State Representative Rick Ream. It codifies Juneteenth as an official state holiday. Juneteenth, of course, commemorates June 19, 1865, the day enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, learned from Union soldiers that they were free. The day commemorates the end of slavery in America. Ivey, for the last 4 years, has used her executive powers to designate Juneteenth as a state holiday. The legislation will make that designation permanent. Let's take a look at other bills signed into law this week, starting with House Bill 159 from State Representative Joe Lovern. It updates the governance structure of the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, adding the governor as a commission member, adjusting lengths of members' terms, and imposing term limits. Senate Bill 330 from State Senator Dan Roberts reconstitutes the Birmingham Waterworks Board to include members outside the city of Birmingham in areas the system services. It also gives the governor and lieutenant governor appointments to that board. Some in the city of Birmingham are upset about the bill, and a lawsuit has already been filed to challenge it. And House Bill 447 from State Representative David Faulkner. This is the Farm Bureau Health Plans bill that will allow the Alabama Farmers Federation to sell health benefits plans to its members. With just one meeting day remaining in the session, lawmakers are running out of time to pass remaining legislation. Wednesday's slowdown meant the Senate never got to consider more than 50 local bills waiting on final passage. Senate President Pro Tem Garland Gudger spoke with reporters this week about what to expect when senators return to Montgomery for that final day next Wednesday.
When the question about ending it today was the right decision, I believe, so that everyone stopped. We had a clean break, and then we're going into the last legislative day, knowing exactly what's in front of us. By trying to start fighting back and forth and going into the cloturing mode, I think all that does is create a little bit of animosity towards each side of the aisle, and we don't want that.
What about the police immunity bill?
There's going to probably be some talk about that. We're trying to figure out if that's going to be on there. Plus, we have some confirmations that we have to do. That's our duty in the Senate that we're going to have to focus on too. As of right now, the local legislation is my main priority because all politics is local, and we want to make sure that we try to take care of our members here and the members in the House.
Possibility of being a long day next week?
Yes.
Busy 11 hours.
We're going to come in at 1 o'clock, just so you'll know, and we'll probably be here until we get through with everything we've got.
It's going to be quite a final day of the session. The Alabama State Department of Education announced the 2025-2026 Teacher of the Year and Alternate Teacher of the Year this week during a ceremony at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. Katie Collins, a teacher at Bluff Park Elementary School in Hoover, has been named Teacher of the Year. With this title, Collins will serve as the state's ambassador for public education and the teaching profession. Collins has been teaching for 20 years. Her teaching career has included first grade, middle, and high school. She's taught French and English as a second language for elementary school students and adult courses. And Aubrey Bennett, a teacher at the Birmingham City School System's George Washington Carver High School, was named the 2025-2026 Alternate State Teacher of the Year.
So the 25-26 Alternate State Teacher of the Year and Secondary Teacher of the Year is Aubrey Bennett, George Washington Carver High School, Birmingham City Schools. The 25-26 Alabama Teacher of the Year and Elementary Teacher of the Year is Katie Collins.
Congratulations. We look forward to having them on Spotlight on Education next month. Big news this week for the long-awaited Mobile River Bridge and Bayway project. The Alabama Department of Transportation this week announced it was formally moving forward with the project with the firm Kiewit Massman Trailer. That marks a significant milestone for getting the project underway. But just a few hours after that announcement, the news got even better. The U.S. Department of Transportation announced that it will release the $550 million federal grant that was awarded last year to fund the construction of the project. That was a key piece of the puzzle the state has been waiting for. Tony Harris of ALDOT says, quote, "We appreciate the commitment of Secretary Duffy and the Trump administration to expedite the completion of the funding process for the $550 million grant for the Mobile River Bridge. With this commitment, this is another positive step toward the completion of the Mobile River Bridge and Bayway project." News on redistricting this week. A 3-judge panel at the Northern District of Alabama has affirmed its initial ruling that Alabama must use the congressional map drawn by a special master last year and imposed by the court. Federal judges ruled that the legislature intentionally diluted the voting strength of black voters when it drew congressional lines back in 2023. The judges blocked Alabama from using a state-drawn map that they said flouted their directive to draw a plan that was fair to black voters. Alabama must continue using the court-ordered map for the remainder of the decade. The decision was not a surprise because the panel had already ruled twice that the state, they had ruled against the state twice previously. But remember that the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to take up a similar case from Louisiana this term that could be instructive toward how redistricting is done in the future. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined by House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Alabama's Gulf Coast is renowned for its white sand beaches. Bordering the Gulf of Mexico, it is an important part of the quality of life for many of the state's citizens and one of the state's greatest economic and environmental assets. The white sandy beaches of Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, and Dauphin Island are popular vacation destinations for Alabamians and out-of-state tourists. The fine quality of the sand and gentleness of the surf make for some of the prettiest beaches in the world and are the top tourist destination in the state.
You're watching Alabama Public Television, celebrating 70 years of service to Alabama.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Speaker of the House, Nathaniel Ledbetter. Mr. Speaker, thanks for coming on the show.
It's good to be here, as always.
Well, here we are at the end of session. I know there's one day left,
right.
Coming back on Wednesday, but we're pretty much, at the end. I wanted to ask you, it's been a slog. It's been a pretty impactful session.
Mm-hmm.
What are your biggest takeaways in terms of how would you grade really the session?
Yeah, I think it was a good session. If I was going to really grade it, I'd give it an A. We passed some tough legislation this year, some that needed to be passed and some that helps the state. So the members always got to give credit to them because, if we look at the number of hours we spend in the chamber, that's just like the tip of the iceberg. Because they spend so much time in committees and in meetings and working on bills. And, we've passed some good legislation that's going to be impactful for the state for years to come.
Speaking of working on bills, Chairman Rex Reynolds has put a lot of time into that crime bill. Mm-hmm. I know there's a big crime package, but that big one, 202, he has put a lot of hours into that. There's some disagreement upstairs. Democrats pushing back really hard. Do you think that one's going to get over the finish line at the end of the day?
Yeah, I feel good about it. I think so. I've been working with the pro tem on that bill, and that's one of the bills we had in the crime package we put together early with the governor, and our staff and their staff worked closely together to get that package put together. I think it's impactful to let the people that wears uniforms across the state that protects us every day, day in and day out, that we have their backs. And so that's what we're trying to do, and I think that bill that Chairman Reynolds has got is one that proves that. When we looked at those bills and was looking at the package to move them out, I selected him to carry it for a reason because of his background of being the chief of police there in Huntsville and his passion for the people that wear the uniform. So I'm hopeful that we get it out. I feel like we will, so we'll wait and see.
That was on display in committee, his experience as a former chief of police in Huntsville. A major city
right.
where these issues do come up. And I do think that experience is a lot better than just having an idea about a bill. He has some experience. Well, speaking of that, around this time of session, really more last week, but there's always this tension between the House and the Senate because how many House bills has the Senate passed, how many Senate bills has the House passed. Of course, the Senate has different rules, and they get bottled up pretty easy. Mm-hmm. But are we in a better place now in terms of flow of legislation? Has everybody kind of worked out their differences?
Yeah, I think so for the most part. You're always going to have one or two that's not going to be happy because we can't pass all the bills that we get. We'll probably have close to 1,000 bills that's filed this year. We'll probably pass between 250 or 300 of them. So 70% of the bills that's been filed probably aren't going to get passed for different reasons. Maybe it needs work on them. We had some this week. It's kind of interesting to watch. You know, toward the end of the session, you see some of the bills that's been out there 2 or 3 years. And Terry Collins passed one yesterday for hospital credits that she'd been working on for 3 years. So it happens. I mean, you know, if it's a good bill and we continue to work it and try to make it the best you can be, eventually you'll see it back.
Mm-hmm. Immigration has been a focus this session. Those bills have really started to move here in the last couple of days. Talk about why that's been a priority. I know that, I mean, you had a change in administration, so there's a lot more enforcement from the federal level. Are these bills still necessary given the enforcement from the feds?
Well, I certainly think it's changed, you know, and with the new administration, the border's been pretty much stopped, shut down the flow of coming in. Our country has been taken over from the border, and so we felt like every state had become a border state because of that. And that's why we had the number of bills we had. And of course, we had a lot of people work on them during the off-season, and Ben Robbins being one of them. They worked extremely hard, worked with a group of House members, and we got some of those bills out. We passed a couple of bills in the House yesterday from the Senate. I suspect they'll be passing some next week in the Senate that we've sent up there. And so we probably won't, I don't know that we'll get, I think there was a 12 bill package between the two. Probably won't get all those out, but I think the major ones of that package that protects the border being Alabama and inside the state of Alabama, I think those will get across the finish line.
Mm-hmm. I actually spoke with Mr. Robbins earlier in the session. I guess it was at the very beginning when the bills were first starting to get filed. And I asked him, you know, are you confident that these won't run into legal trouble? Because I was reminded of 2011 when the HB 56 was passed and all that. So are y'all confident? I mean, I assume there will be lawsuits over some of this stuff, but have y'all buttoned up legally and constitutionally with all these immigration proposals?
Yeah, I mean, I feel as good as you can feel about it. I mean, it doesn't matter. As you know, you've been here a while. Any bill that we pass is subject to litigation, and those are certainly no different. You know, Ben's pretty sharp. I mean, he's a smart attorney, and we got smart attorneys that works that draft those bills. So I feel good about what we've done. You know, will they be litigated? I mean, there's always a possibility, you know, of any bill being litigated. But I think they've done a lot of work on those, and I feel good about where they've got them.
He seemed to think that there were some lessons learned from that experience. You know, and certainly the people that write the bills are still around, you know, legislative staff and all that. Switching gears, let's talk about tax cuts. It's kind of two things happening at one time. You've got the overtime tax cut going away, sunsetting, and then there are a number of new tax cuts that y'all are implementing. Talk about that. I mean, let's start, I guess, with the grocery tax cut. One more penny off that sales tax on food.
Right. Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, that affects everybody in the state of Alabama. You know, it's not a pick and choose. We're not picking winners and losers. Everybody that goes and buys groceries are going to benefit from that. You know, it cuts it in half. We were at 4 cents, and now it's going to go down to 2. It's a big deal. You know, families across the state of Alabama is going to save almost $400 because of those cuts in the last 2 years. So, I mean, that's almost a week's groceries. For most families, it is. So
groceries prices have been rising.
That's right. So, you know, I feel good about it. I'd like to be able to do away with all of it, and I think eventually if we keep working on it, we will. One of the things that come out of the Senate just today was the personal property tax, which is something I think is the most egregious bill that we've got. And so as a freshman, I filed a bill to try to do away with then as a former business owner. You know, it's kind of aggravating to have to itemize every year something you've already paid tax on. And we did away with some of that about 3 years ago, and I think the bill come down out of the Senate will do away with a little more of it. Again, as a grocery tax, I'd like to see that go away. So it helps small businesses across the state, and I think it's positive.
On the education front, it was a busy session. It always is. It's kind of the top issue, you know, every year. A couple of things. Number one, the RAISE Act. I keep saying that long term, that's going to be one of the biggest deals, biggest pieces of legislation, really passing a couple of years. Talk about how that came about, because I know that your chairman spent a lot of time on that. Members of those committees spent a lot of time on that. But what was it like in caucus and with members kind of walking through? Because change can be tough. Changing a funding model can be tough. So talk about how that actually won over the members.
Well, as you know, Chairman Garrett does a great job, and we're fortunate to have him in that position. And he and Senator Orr work closely together. And we knew just through what other states had done that our model was outdated. I mean, the formula that we put together for funding our schools was over 30 years ago. So it was time for a change and to look at what they did once the members understood it, and it was weighted toward those programs that needed the most, whether it's a poverty area, where it's EL students, or our flexibility that gives the superintendent to put money where they need it.
Special needs,
Special
gifted,
needs, yeah, special needs and gifted. And, you know, also it does give some flexibility to the superintendents. And so I thought that was really important. And the way that they explained the bill and the way it was brought down, I think our members understood. A lot of those districts, everybody got the same amount of money. But because of the way they did it, most districts got more money than they would have gotten. So this was a good year, I think, for schools across the state, K through 12, and you know, not only that, but that was mostly that program was in that K-12 model. But you know, we had a good budget this year. It was good for all the schools across the state, higher ed, and two-year colleges as well. So I think it was good. The good thing about it, we're going to get to see, you know, how it works and how positive it is. But everything I've talked to from superintendents across the state, it's been very positive.
Yeah, a significant accomplishment maybe doesn't get enough attention, but that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Paid parental leave for both state employees and for teachers. It's actually a pretty big change, because before, if you had a baby, adopted a baby, whatever, you're taking vacation time.
That's right.
You're taking unpaid time off, maybe borrowing hours and things like that. But now there will be paid parental leave for state employees and for teachers and education workers. Talk about that as an accomplishment.
Yeah, I think it is a big deal. You know, most of the families that start out and have started their family with young kids, it's tough sometimes just to make ends meet, and being able to give them parental leave in the education department and also in just our workforce across the state, it's a big deal. And certainly believe for the young men and women that's starting a family, you know, I think it helps. Just if you put that together with the grocery tax and some other things we've done, I think it's important for the people in this state, and certainly important for state workers.
Also, workers' comp. It's almost kind of related. It's one of those things that it's almost surprising we haven't had it.
Yeah. When they come and talk to me about that last year, actually, it was the first time I'd heard about it. I was shocked at the way our workman's comp worked, and it really didn't work. You know, we had a 3-member board, and they really didn't have any money to pay claims, basically. And so once that we got to digging into it, it's something I can't believe we hadn't already fixed. But I'm glad we fixed it this year, and of course I think the governor's already signed that bill. So it's important for our employees again. I mean, I think this was a good year for employees, just like the teachers. You know, we wasn't able to give the pay raise to the employees this year that we given in the past, but we did pay for PHIP, which if you look at the numbers from a dollar amount, that's about 4.5% pay raise. That they're not, you know, that's money they didn't have to take out of their pocket.
Right.
So we were happy to do that, and I think it's positive for our employees.
Right, and just to explain, the PHIP, their costs went up, and the legislature funded that balance rather than, because otherwise they would have had to pay
That's
higher insurance costs
out of their pocket. I mean, the thing about it is, when you look at across the board what we've tried to do, you can't let one thing take over what we've done for them on the other side. So, you know, if it's parental leave or if it's workman's comp or if it's the grocery tax, even if you let a insurance increase come into effect, then it's going to eat up the savings that they've got on those sides. So I thought it was important, and to me, you know, if I was an employee, you don't get that taxed. So really, it's a better pay raise instead of having to pay it out of your pocket. So I feel like that was strong.
Well, and it also is a reminder. I always try to explain this to folks. When, you know, everybody loves a tax cut, but it also impacts revenue. Nobody likes education cuts or cuts to state agencies. So y'all are constantly doing a balancing act between, okay, how much can we cut to where it doesn't actually impact significantly, you know, state budgets. It's probably not easy.
It's not easy. I mean, you know, and the prime example of that, to be honest with you, is overtime tax. It was something I supported. You know, I thought it was a good bill. You know, the fiscal note we got was $30 million. Well, it wound up, it's going to be like $320 million. Yeah. Well, what people's got to understand is that $320 million comes out of the classroom. It comes away from students, teachers, and schools across the state. I mean, we got schools in our state that is in desperate repair as far as the construction or the building. And so that money could be spent for a new classroom, or it could be spent to update a classroom or tear down some of these old classrooms in rural Alabama. So it's not that easy. I mean, if you just had all the money in the world, that would be great, but we don't. And I think you got to be physically conservative. I think that's why we're in the shape we're in from a budgetary standpoint, is because we have been physically conservative. and that proves it, I think, with the 2 budgets we had this year. But you got to be mindful of that. You know, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the old saying is. So I think it's important that we understand, you know, if we went with the full implementation of the overtime tax, it would have been something that had been taken away from education.
Mm-hmm. When I had you on at the very beginning of the session, I think it was actually before the session, I asked you about your new counterpart in the Senate, Garland Gudger, Pro Tem Garland Gudger, because he was coming into the job brand new. I think I asked you what advice you had for him or something like that. But now we're, you know, a session through it. And how did y'all's working relationship go?
That's been great. I've really enjoyed working with him. He's done a good job. It's got to be a tough situation. I mean,
I think they were testing him a little bit.
Maybe, you know, and then you come in on the very first day session starts and get elected. I mean, you think about that. He didn't have a chance to set his chairman. He didn't have a chance to set his employees or his staff. And so that's tough. But I think he navigated the water pretty well. I mean, I give him credit for what he's done. And, you know, the one thing I will say is we stay in touch constantly. Just before we come on the air, he and I were talking about the schedule for next week and what we're going to do and some of the things that's moving in both chambers. So I've enjoyed working with him. I think he's going to do a good job. And I think the people of Alabama, with the working relationship we had and with the governor, I think we're going to have a good outcome in the last year of the quadrennium.
Before I let you go, let's talk about SLC, colloquially known as the Southern Legislative Conference. You're the chairman this year, so that means we get to host it here in Alabama.
That's right.
It's in Birmingham in July. Talk about the planning that goes into that and what chance this is to showcase our state to other counterparts of yours and other lawmakers from other states.
Well, there's no question about that. SLC is one of my favorite organizations, and that's why I got involved years ago. And when they asked me to co-chair and then to chair the organization, you got 15 southern states. I think it's an honor, first of all, to be selected by those 15 states to chair it. But what was important to me and the reason I decided to take the role is I just feel like over the past few years, the last decade, we've made so many strides in Alabama from our economy, and we see it now in our education, we see it now in our infrastructure and broadband, everything. And I think it's important for people across the South and across the country to know Alabama's not the old Alabama. You know, we are the new Alabama. If you look at where we're at in research, if you look at what's going on in Huntsville and Mobile, it's amazing. I mean, you and I grew up in this state, and to see what's happening, we all should gleam with pride to see what our state's doing. So I want other states to see we're not the old Alabama, we're the new Alabama. And our staff has worked diligently to try to put this together. We've been working on it for over a year, and it's coming up in July, and we've got a really great program going on. I'm so excited to bring people in from across different states. I was with the Speaker of Kentucky this last weekend, and
I heard you went to the Kentucky.
Yeah, first time bucket list. So
how about that?
They had invited us up. The Pro Tem and the Speaker had invited us up, and had a great time. And they were a gracious host, and we look forward to returning the favor at SLC in July.
Okay, maybe you can bring him down to Talladega or something like that.
Well, I think he might get to see a motor speedway.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Barber Motorsport. Yeah. Well, we're excited because Capital Journal is going to be there. We're going to be on location at SLC there. I'm really looking forward. Obviously, we'll have a conversation with you, but your colleagues and others from other states, and bring those to our Capital Journal audience.
Oh, yeah, I'm excited about that. I do want the speakers and pro tems and governors or lieutenant governors for other states that's going to be there, is give you a chance to talk to them. Appreciate y'all working it out to be part of it. I think it's a big deal.
We're looking forward to it.
And I think that helps us not only with the people coming there, Todd, but with having you guys there to showcase what we're doing, and having those people to come in and see it. I mean, the first day of registration, we had the largest registration that they'd had on the first day. So we had over 500. We suspect that we'll probably have 1,700 people coming in from those 15 states. So it's pretty exciting.
I better hurry up and get my hotel room. They're going to run out.
Yeah, that's right.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time. Good luck the last day of session, and I guess we'll see you on Wednesday.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Todd. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Alabama Public Television is your place for quality educational services. Free professional development for educators and child care providers. Access to free curriculum-aligned videos, lesson plans, and instructional resources with PBS Learning Media. And all the PBS Kids programs parents know and trust. Learn something new every day with Alabama Public Television. Visit us at aptv.org/education to learn more.
The USS Alabama is a World War II-era battleship that first served in the Atlantic Theater, but was better known for helping to take Japanese-held islands in the Pacific between 1943 and 1945. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Alabama's state-of-the-art radar alerted the fleet to incoming aircraft, providing the Americans enough time to scramble fighters and decimate the attacking force. Later, the Alabama served during the Battle of Leyte Gulf and anchored in Tokyo Bay to unload Allied occupation forces. In 1964, the state of Alabama took possession of the battleship. Alabama schoolchildren raised $100,000 in nickels and dimes to help bring the ship to Mobile and create Battleship Memorial Park. The park features the Alabama, the World War II-era submarine USS Drum, and an American military aircraft collection. Battleship Memorial Park is one of the state's most visited attractions.
You may have noticed that we do not have a story package from Washington, D.C. this week. That's because our Washington correspondent, Alex Engel, is here in Montgomery and joins me in studio right now. Alex, good to have you back in Montgomery.
It's great to be back. It's a nice little change from D.C., you know, a little bit different, but still legislature business going on.
Yeah, first taste of the Alabama legislature, a little different than Congress, I would imagine.
Just a little, but, you know, personalities and drive is in both of the places, which is interesting to see.
I wanted to catch up with you about some politics. You've been covering the possibility that Senator Tommy Tuberville, coach, might run for governor. I mean, it's just a really big story, and you've been reporting on this. You follow him in the hallways and things like that. What can you tell us about his decision-making?
Yeah, well, the great thing about me being in DC is that when all of this news is happening, right, I'm able to catch him in the hallways and to really ask what he's thinking in that moment, because we know that those things can change, and so it's really great to be there and ask him in person when things come up. Seems pretty confident that he's making a run for it. I mean, he's telling everyone in the Senate, at least, that he is going to be running for it and has having conversations with leadership and stuff, and we know that just this past week when Trump was in Alabama that he flew on Air Force One and talked to Trump about it. I asked him, I was like, you want to give me any insight into that conversation? And he said, you want to keep it private, of course, but, you know, always wanting to see if he'll give me information. But he seems really confident that he will run. And he's told reporters in a press call, I think last week, that he was like, an announcement is coming in like a couple weeks. You know, he's given Memorial Day as his kind of like deadline, and we know that's also the day they can start fundraising for statewide office. And so I don't know, it'd be kind of weird to tease an announcement coming in a couple weeks if you're running for re-election, because he's kind of already said that he would run for re-election. So I'm not guessing that a big announcement is, oh, I'm staying in the Senate. Right. You know, I think the big announcement would have to be that he is running for governor, and he seems pretty confident about it, and again, telling everyone about it.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you've been able to catch up with him and just ask him on the fly, you know, in person. Now, there have been questions about Tuberville's residency, right? Because he has those homes in Florida. He kind of lived there before he moved back. You've done some reporting on this. What can you tell us about his residency in terms of, because, right, you've got the Constitution says you have to be a resident citizen of the state for 7 years, right, to be a candidate for governor or lieutenant governor. So how does his residency line up?
Yeah, I mean, that is, everyone wants to know, right? And no one really knows for sure how the residency could play out, you know, especially if it gets challenged in court. So we don't know exactly what factors could be useful or not useful, but we're using the tools that we have and the information that we have available to make our determinants of what we do know about his residency, right? And so we know he has this Auburn home. He's had it in Lee County, and so we need to know if that's his primary residence, right? Because we also know he has residences in Florida, and I know there's debate on whether or not he spends more time in Florida compared to this Auburn home. So we decided to look at the homestead exemption, right? Because you can only have a homestead exemption on a house that is your primary residence. And so since he has had a homestead exemption in Lee County at his home in Auburn since 2018, we found that through records request and through contacting local offices that he does indeed have that homestead exemption. So that could prove as one of his key points to prove his residency for 7 years, because once we get to the 2026 election, that would be, you know, 7 years. So I think that could be one factor in his toolbox to prove that he has been a resident of the state for at least 7 years before this election. And I talked to him about that once we found that out, and he was like, you know, I have no doubt that I meet the residency requirements. I wouldn't even consider running for governor if he didn't meet the residency requirements. So debatable on if we think this is enough. I mean, it definitely is helpful to have this homestead exemption on the record. And of course, he's going to use that to his advantage in terms of making it himself known that he is confident in that. And so he kind of reiterated that to me once we had those records in our hands. And then I know there's also been some questions about his home in Madison County. And so he bought that home, I think, last year with his other son. And so there's also a homestead exemption on that house in Madison County. So again, the next day, I'm in the Senate. I run into Senator Tuberville. I'm going to ask him about that, right? We want to clear that confusion, because if you can only have one homestead exemption to prove your primary residence, and then we learn that the house in Madison County also has a homestead exemption, we want to figure out which one are you claiming, right? And so we asked him about that, and he said that the homestead exemption on his Madison County house is for his son, because that is actually his son's house. And so Tuberville does not live in that house, and maybe he'll stay with his son. But that homestead exemption was for his son, and it's particular, kind of in the minutia details of it all, is that homestead exemption was for people under 65. So that wouldn't be Senator Tuberville. That would be clarifying that homestead exemption in that house would be for his son, while the homestead exemption in the Auburn house is for people over 65. So that kind of helps clear it up and makes that determination that he's saying one is his son, one is his. It can be clear in just the facts of the type, So that's just like a little tiny detail, but it could be important down the line when people start unpacking this more and more.
Sure, and tip of the cap to Mary Self for some of that reporting on the homestead exemption. She's great at those public records requests. While I've got you, real quick, I know Congress is going through the budget resolution reconciliation process. A lot of folks down here are wondering about Medicaid and whether there are going to be cuts to Medicaid, because that's kind of been on the table. It sounds like they're going back and forth. Maybe what can you tell us about the latest in terms of what could happen with Medicaid?
I know, I really wish I had more to tell people, and I think that is kind of the case with everyone, even lawmakers themselves. Obviously, lots and lots of concern on Capitol Hill from both sides of the aisle on what exactly the future of Medicaid could look like, right? So in the bill that they have proposed in the budget, they have to cut $880 billion from the committee that oversees Medicaid spending. And just doing the math, there's just not enough of other things that they can cut in order to not touch Medicaid in some capacity. And even making small changes like adding work requirements and adding more checks for Medicaid are some of the things that Republicans are trying to throw out as to being ways that they can cut Medicaid, but there's just no way that those cuts themselves can get them to that number. So they're kind of just trying to figure out how to get to that number. And I don't know how they're going to agree. I mean, you have moderates wanting to make very small cuts. We want the ultra conservatives and those people who make extreme cuts because they want to have $2 trillion in savings. So Speaker Johnson, I don't know how he makes everyone happy. He's done things before that we are surprised that he has, but right now they're still in like closed door meetings with committee members that are overseeing some of these more contentious topics like Medicaid. And so they're still, one day they're going to cut this, the next day they're planning on cutting this, and then it changes. So unfortunately, we don't know what is ultimately going to end up in that final bill. They might have markups next week. And so the committees that are overseeing like Medicaid and SNAP might have markups next week. And if they do, then that should give us some more clear answers once they release like their text of the legislation and then start marking it up. But I don't see it being an easy markup for sure. And Democrats have been putting up a fight against this, of course, and will continue to just hammer the Republicans on any way they try to change it. I think that'll be their messaging against that.
And of course, then there's the Senate and the president. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors there, but I really appreciate the update. We're out of time, but I just want to say thank you for your work in Washington. I've had so much great feedback from our viewers about just the addition of our Washington, D.C. coverage of the delegation there on the ground in Capitol Hill. So thank you. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capitol Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capitol Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capitol Journal podcasts.
The World War II-era Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American pilots in U.S. military service. Because Tuskegee was the only training facility for black pilots in the United States during World War II, potential pilots came from all over the country. The first African American flying unit was the 99th Fighter Squadron, which deployed in the spring of 1943. The 99th earned a Distinguished Unit Citation, flying missions against enemy targets over Italy. The second flying unit, the 332nd Fighter Group, flew several successful bomber escort missions throughout the war. Its P-51 fighters had distinctively painted red tails, earning the unit and its planes the nickname Red Tails. In 1948, President Truman issued an executive order mandating the racial integration of all military services. The way was paved by the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, and in 2007, President Bush collectively awarded them a Congressional Gold Medal.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back on Tuesday with more coverage of the Alabama legislature here on Alabama Public Television. As we close tonight, here's some more from the Teacher of the Year ceremony at Alabama Shakespeare Festival.